You're listening to the Live Life Longer show with Dan Voss, inspiring you to live longer through the cold, the hot, breathing, eating, and being nature. In this week's episode, my guests are Denis Neville and Victoria Field. Denis is the CEO of CoreFX Ingredients, which delivers customized ingredient solutions for a diverse range of U.S. food manufacturing and food service customers within the nutrition, health and wellness, sports nutrition, and pet food nutrition markets. And Victoria is the co-founder of Metabolic Health Initiative, which is dedicated to providing cutting-edge evidence-based education to medical professionals, academics, and the general public through digital content and live events, including the annual International Scientific Conference, Metabolic Health Summit. Denis and Victoria, welcome to the Live Life Longer show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation around general health and higher quality of living and longevity. And I know both of you are heavily involved in the ketogenic diet and the many benefits that we can get from the keto diet. So I'd love for you both to maybe share a little bit more about the work that you do in your current role in the health and wellness space. So maybe Victoria, we can start with you sharing a little bit more about your work.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on today. Excited to dive into the conversation. But I really have kind of an eclectic background, I like to call it. My career actually started in TV news and owning a fitness company alongside my husband. Several fitness companies actually were very much involved in the health and wellness space in that capacity. Actually then went on to compete as a professional athlete and train other athletes from everything from the sport of bodybuilding all the way to wrestling, MMA, you name it, with nutrition and training. And, got out of the TV news world, realized I couldn't do it all without compromising my own health, and really got into the world of cancer research next. I loved the fitness and health world and really loved training athletes, and being involved in sport myself, but I wanted to do more that was sort of, right around that same time, I was really learning about, I'd always known about the potential of nutrition in our overall health, but I really was taking a deep dive into metabolic therapies at the time through my later involvement with a nonprofit organization called the Epigenics Foundation. And we were involved in cancer research using metabolic therapies in both humans and canines. Actually, we got our start at a place called KetoPet Sanctuary, where we would actually rescue dogs with naturally occurring forms of cancer that were otherwise going to be euthanized and put them on a ketogenic diet, and actually had PET CT imaging on site, tracked their tumor progression or regression in some cases, and implemented metabolic therapy and metabolic conditioning, and had some pretty incredible results, and then went on to develop partnerships with oncologists so we could really start to take a look at what, ketogenic metabolic therapies look like in humans. But for me, it really kind of the switch sort of flipped when I actually transitioned my dog onto a ketogenic diet through what we learned at KetoPet Sanctuary. The diet has been used for years with epilepsy, and we'll get into that. But from there, we said, my dog had suffered from a traumatic brain injury and grand mal seizures, and we thought, well, if it's been used in humans in this capacity, maybe we could use it in our dog. And she's just, seizure free and doing phenomenally well. And then that was the moment where I was like, okay, I think I need to get off this high carb diet and maybe give this a try myself. And from there, I met my co-host at Metabolic Health Summit, and Dr. Angela Poff and I started Metabolic Health Initiative, which is sort of the overarching organization to Metabolic Health Summit, which is a scientific conference dedicated entirely to metabolic-based therapies, the ketogenic diet, just all things metabolic health. And really the rest is history. We saw a need to bring the scientists, the people together that are doing the work, so we could further this forward and really revolutionize health through nutrition. And yeah, so that's sort of my mix of a career path, but it's been pretty incredible to see this field grow. So
yeah. That's so cool. I love the story around discovering the benefits of ketogenic diet with dogs, and we'll talk about a little bit more, throughout our conversation around, the misinformation that has been out there throughout the years around, eating carbs and low fat diet. And we can get into some of that as we go here, but thanks for sharing that. And
Yeah.
Denis, if you want to share a little bit more about your role as CEO of CoreFX and some of your day-to-day work in the health and wellness space.
Yeah, it's hard to follow Victoria's eclectic story there. Mine is nowhere near as eclectic, but still probably non-traditional in that, I grew up on a dairy farm in rural Ireland, and I'm, here in Chicago, actually Evanston at the moment. So it's quite a journey in its own right. But I'm a food scientist by trade, so science is very important to me. And I grew up with a desire, growing up on a dairy farm, to add value to the world through food and through science and nutrition. Getting to this point, I always felt in research that I did that fats were really important nutritionally and overlooked. We're here right now. Actually, I'm here in the Kerrygold offices because it's a temporary home for us. Because, as I explained to you before, Dan, our own offices unfortunately burned down in December. But Kerrygold, the home of Irish butter, and one time demonized and now loved. And as a scientist, I always knew that. And it was a matter for me of taking that knowledge and how do I get that to the commercial world. Make it something that's valuable to improve the health and nutrition of the world, but also make it a commercial enterprise personally to do something of value as well. So that's why we are where we are. I have a very strong dairy heritage and background, but CoreFX as an entity has evolved, while still dairy is important, to more broader fats and oils as a way of nutritionally adding value and health through nutrition.
That's great. Really great story. Yeah, we're going to get into that a little bit further too, around, the importance of the nutritional value of fats and oils. But I do find it very interesting how we have gone through phases of demonizing butter. Kerrygold is, something I use in my kitchen in a lot of my meals. So I'm looking forward to kind of getting into that concept of how fat can be our friend, and we'll certainly get into that further throughout our conversation.
Yeah.
Before we get into nutrition and start really kind of dissecting the ketogenic diet, I'd love to start off with a framework of general health, right? The roles of sleep and managing stress, and what we can be doing to build up that gut microbiome that's so important for our health. So maybe we can start off by talking a little bit more about what role that plays in our overall health by getting those. It might seem like basics, but they're really not. So maybe you want to touch a little bit more on stress and proper sleep and good nutrition.
Yeah, those seem simple, but they are, like you said, very complex, and it's really fascinating to see where sort of the research is going in all of those different categories. Sleep is such a vital, important piece of the equation when it comes to metabolic health. I think that it's involved in a variety of sort of processes and recovery, muscle growth. Impaired sleep, I think, has been linked, at least in the research, to just blood sugar levels that are a little all over the place, potentially reduced insulin sensitivity. What's interesting is our brain sort of has this immune system called the lymphatic system that basically, when we sleep, it goes through and sort of cleans out all these sort of waste and toxic proteins. But it's somewhat dormant when we are awake. So when we don't get sleep, it's almost like forgetting to take out the trash in a way. So sleep is critical for so many different things, right? It's also critical in the management of stress, potentially in sort of plays a role in hunger hormones and all kinds of stuff. I mean, you could really dive into a deep rabbit hole with it. Stress, same thing. I mean, stress is a very sort of natural response, that kind of fight or flight, response that is sort of evolutionary, right? That we needed to have. However, I think we all kind of sit in this constant state of stress, especially these days, where we're just constantly activating that sort of fight or flight mode, which, in turn can cause all kinds of sort of a cascade of other impairments and effects, like from, your stress hormones to, potentially aging issues. And there's all kinds of things that are linked to stress. And it's really interesting actually to see where some of the management or some of the research is going on with the management of stress, specifically as it relates to meditation. So it's sort of like how we, alleviate stress. I think that research is particularly interesting, and how it affects our, things like telomere length and all kinds of deep science-based things. So, sleep and stress are two critical pieces. The gut microbiome is also heavily important and is being heavily researched as it relates to potentially to metabolic disease. Obesity research specifically has involved that, and it's just fascinating to see where that goes. But I think those are key things when it comes to, at least from my personal perspective, and just seeing where some of the research is taking us. Just in addition to nutrition, and what we talk about all the time is sleep, stress management, exercise. All of these key things play major roles in our overall health and longevity. And as the research sort of rolls on down the road, it's becoming more and more evident that we really need to pay attention to the choices that we're making every day. So,
yeah, sleep is so important. And I think in terms of the stress management piece, I think we're hopefully learning now more than ever how important it is to manage that stress. You mentioned things like meditation. I like to spend time out in nature when I can.
Yes.
And then of course there's the difference between low grade chronic stress and then, good stressors, like hormetic stress. So there's a difference there. You can actually use things like nature to actually deal with both, right? You can deal with or manage some of that low-grade chronic stress by getting outside, but then you can also have, things like cold exposure and breath work and intermittent fasting, which would, cover the hormetic stressors, which, as you discussed, can lengthen the and improve the health of our telomeres. So,
right. I think it's hard to stay in that window, right? That hermetic window, as people sort of, there's a fine line between, hormesis and actually maybe getting some benefit from stress. And then, I think a lot of people are flirting with that other end of the spectrum where they're just in this constant state of stress and not managing it well. So
very true. Around metabolic health, in terms of, nutrition. Well, maybe we should start with the ketogenic diet, which I know both of you are very into and very passionate about. Why don't we start with what the ketogenic diet is, and you can maybe go into some more of the science of what's happening to our bodies as we get into a state of ketosis.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the ketogenic diet is known as a high fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate diet, but it comes in many forms. I mean, a classic ketogenic diet that's been used in epilepsy for literally 100 years, it looks much different than maybe say like a lifestyle based ketogenic diet. But the ultimate goal is basically to induce a metabolic state of ketosis. So the way I like to kind of think about it is we're all sort of like hybrid cars where we have the ability to use two different primary fuel sources, gasoline or electricity. And depending on who you ask and what research you read, you might find that ketones versus carbohydrates, some would say one is maybe better than the other, but you need both. But most people don't tap into both metabolic states. Most people sort of, because of the way our diets have kind of changed and are more so on the higher carbohydrate side, we've never with the exception of the history of human beings way back in the day, we don't really go into this like sort of state of ketosis until today. Now it's become sort of this buzzword. But basically it's really the only nutrition approach that you can actually measure in blood and breath through beta hydroxybutyrate, which you can measure in blood, or, acetone, which can be measured in breath. And so that really is a big differentiating, I think, factor than most nutrition approaches, because it provides you with data that other nutritional approaches really don't. And so it's the whole process or the whole concept is basically, if you restrict carbohydrates, whether that be through a ketogenic diet or maybe even fasting, the liver actually will convert fats into ketone bodies, beta hydroxy, what I just mentioned. And it's really this, your body uses ketones as an alternative sort of primary fuel source. Obviously, glucose is still present and being utilized in some capacity, but there's a lot of research showing some benefit as to being in a state of ketosis. There's just, when I talk about it, it almost sounds a little bit like snake oil when you think about the various potential applications of the ketogenic diet and ketosis. If you just do a search on, clinicaltrials.gov or PubMed or whatnot, you will see literally research going on in everything from Alzheimer's to traumatic brain injury to, obesity, you name it. So it's really exciting to see where it's going. But I think, what's really interesting is the research is showing there's a variety of mechanisms, a lot of mechanisms potentially at play, but we know that, it's helpful when it comes to lowering insulin, stabilizing blood glucose levels, potentially reducing inflammation, possibly stabilizing stress. I mean, even some preclinical, information or research is showing that it may actually, impact some of the neurometabolic things that are going on when it comes to mental health and mental illness. So it's really, I think some of the key things about the ketogenic diet and why it may stretch across these sort of vast areas of research is because of its potential and what it does in terms of its effects on insulin and inflammation. And so it's exciting to see where it goes, but it's got a really long, heavy history. And a lot of people kind of see it as, oh, it's just another fad, when in fact it's been used clinically for the last 100 years and was first developed at the Mayo Clinic for epilepsy. So it's exciting to see where the future is headed with it, because I think there's a lot of potential of it being a part of the conversation, at least in conjunction with standard of care. And it could have some pretty powerful effects on medicine and how we, our perspective on how we treat certain things. So
definitely.
I think that nobody can explain the science of it better than Victoria. But, there's a practical aspect of this as well that, it's about, from a consumer perspective, there's kind of two avenues. There's the diet, which ketogenic diet. But there's the health aspect of it, which is far more important from our perspective at CoreFX as well. So commercially, we might be selling more into the ketogenic space for diet purposes, as in maintaining weight, but there's much more growth in the area of the ketogenic and metabolic pathways that are related to that from a health perspective, keeping the brain strong, preventing dementia. And that's becoming far more important as we see it commercially in the world now, than the diet of weight management and what can be considered faddish in a way. And I think that's some of the has pulled down that whole movement a little bit, in that some who want to knock it can say, well, it's a fad because it's diet related. It's like Atkins. It's like you name it. The number of lifestyles for diet that have been tried over decades. But it's different, because I think, Victoria would agree that it's far more than that. It's about a health movement, really.
Yeah, that's a really good point of getting past that idea that the ketogenic diet is strictly, the nutritional function of it. And of course, has the word diet in it. So that's natural, but it goes far beyond that in terms of, like you mentioned, benefits for cognitive function and anti-inflammation and several other benefits. So on the note of cognitive function, how is ketosis related to cognitive function? And, Dennis, you mentioned Alzheimer's. What are some things you're seeing there? Some new promising hope that we have with ketogenic diet as relates to cognitive function?
Yeah, I Dennis, I can maybe talk about some of what we're seeing, at least on the science side. I think sort of the neurocognitive, the neurology sort of space right now, and that area of research as it pertains to the ketogenic diet is probably some of the most promising science that we're seeing right now. I think brain health and ketosis, much like how it works in epilepsy, we're seeing some pretty incredible things coming out of both, preclinical, clinical studies. It's fascinating because traditionally, it's thought that Alzheimer's is something that, can't be prevented or doesn't or just progresses, and there's really nothing that you can do. But some of the most fascinating research by Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's really one of the world's experts when it comes to neurodegenerative disease and cognitive decline. If you take a look at his, decades of research, and now he's sort of put together this protocol that he says addresses cognitive decline and may even actually reverse it for some people, which is something you never heard about before. But if you look at his protocol, it's inclusive of things like nutrition, ketogenic nutrition specifically, exercise, fasting, sleep, all of these key things that are choices that we make every day. So it's really exciting to kind of see where that research is headed specifically. We know that Alzheimer's is really an underfueled brain is sort of like a key feature of cognitive decline, and impaired glucose metabolism is also known to be associated with Alzheimer's disease. So, in theory, ketones is this sort of alternative primary source of fuel. If we can put somebody into a state of ketosis, could that help the brain sort of bypass the need of or at least the extensive need of glucose? Obviously, the brain still requires glucose, but if you can provide it an alternative fuel source, can that sort of help allow for the brain to kind of find sort of brain energy homeostasis, if you will? So it's really exciting to see where some of the research with Alzheimer's is going. I think there's some studies showing, just in terms of ketones and their cognitive protective effects or neuroinflammation lowering effects. That's sort of a really exciting area of research. And even ketones have shown to potentially enhance the conversion of glutamate, which is sort of the brain's excitatory neurotransmitter, to GABA, which is the brain's calming neurotransmitter. So almost producing this sort of calming effect. On the same token, as not to go down sort of a rabbit hole with the brain health piece, but on the same sort of in the same breath, nutritional psychiatry is exploding right now because at least when it comes to some of the preclinical studies and in case reports and whatnot, for those who are listening who want to kind of explore that area, Dr. Georgia Eid and Dr. Chris Palmer, two nutrition psychiatrists, are doing incredible work and actually talking about what they're seeing in their patients and publishing some of that information. I would highly recommend looking at their work. But it shows that maybe the ketogenic diet can potentially, at least in preclinical studies, balance possibly neurotransmitters and also target some of the neurometabolic features of mental illness, looking at things like oxidative stress, again, that brain energy, metabolism impairment to neuroinflammation. Those are sort of common themes that you see within mental illness, Alzheimer's, even things like traumatic brain injury and what that sort of does in terms of the brain's requirement for glucose, but then its inability to use glucose efficiently. Again, if we can provide it with something like ketones, what does that mean for somebody who's experiencing significant impairment? So yeah, I could talk about the brain health piece all day. I would say that is probably one of the most exciting areas of research. And one of the areas of research that's been sort of looked into probably the longest. Again, this year is the 100th year anniversary of the ketogenic diet being used as a metabolic therapy for refractory epilepsy. So where drugs fail, it will be actually implemented in a clinical setting. And in most seizure types, it will actually stop seizures from happening. And I think it's like 15 to 20% or so of those that go on a ketogenic diet, for those that implement that, seizures often never come back. And
Wow.
actually, Charlie of the Charlie Foundation is a really incredible story of that, where it's a nonprofit organization that was started by Jim Abrams, and his son actually went on a ketogenic diet. He found the ketogenic diet through his sort of self-research, and his son Charlie went on the ketogenic diet. This is after brain surgery, after drugs. Nothing would sort of stop his seizures. As soon as he got into sort of a state of ketosis, his seizures stopped. And when he went off of the diet, I think it was a couple of years later, those seizures have never come back. So that has huge, I mean, you know, it needs to be a part of the conversation, especially, you know, a potential option for people who are suffering from epilepsy. And it's exciting to see where that conversation is going in other neurological conditions.
Yeah, it's so promising. Yeah, I've talked back to the Alzheimer's piece. I've talked publicly on my podcast quite a bit about my family history of Alzheimer's on my dad's side, just plagued with the disease. And for so long, I think we thought that it was 100% genetic. And we're learning more and more about it now that things like, you know, sleep and managing stress and the nutrition piece that you talked about and exercise. So for someone like myself, it's hopeful to know, you know, I think you said, Victoria, it's the choices that we make every day. And one of those things is nutrition and how we eat. So lots of promising hope, I guess, on the horizon.
Absolutely. Yeah. More research is certainly needed, but at least where we are so far has been exciting to see.
Yeah, definitely. And Victoria, you mentioned 100 years that the keto diet has been around. And I'd love to hear from both of you on maybe like what has happened along the way in terms of the ketogenic diet, the principles of it has been around for 100 years. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about that history and what's been happening and how it seems like it goes in and out of maybe being a fad and being in mainstream spotlight. So tell us a little bit more about that history and how some people might be hearing about it for the first time, even though it's been around for so long.
Yeah. Dennis, do you want to talk from a consumer sort of, I guess, company standpoint, and I'll dive into the other side?
You know, because Victoria can talk about that detail of it as well. I can just come at it from the point of view of fats and oils generally, or lipids, and the fact that the reason why the ketogenic lifestyle or diet went out of fashion was because fats and oils went out of fashion. You know, there was a movement in the 50s to demonize lipids as a highly valuable way of gaining nutrition, and unfortunately that stuck around for a long time, and it was driven by certain bodies, politically and otherwise. And you know, it's taken a long time to recover that. So I would say that when Victoria talks about it, that's one of the main reasons why. But you know, it's fat is your friend, and we know that now. You know, the whole pyramid was developed back then, really can be almost turned upside down, or at least turned on its side. We're seeing the negative effects of that thinking to this day still. I mean, you know, I've talked with Victoria earlier, just, you know, talking with people casually about what's going on. You know, you look at Chicago public schools, the school lunch program there is just not very good. And it's not because people don't care, or the authorities that are creating these menus don't care. They're being guided by a really old way of looking at nutrition. So it's up to us to try and change that. You know, one person at a time, one brain at a time, one body at a time. And that's what we're doing here at CoreFX. And you know, Victoria is doing that with her movement and everybody else that that supports her. But it's not just about ketosis. You know, this is about fats and oils being good for you generally. You know, I was joking with Victoria. I always think about, you know, fats are made up of fatty acids. You know, if you break it down to the actual biochemistry of it, it's fatty acids, and they're called fatty acids. And fat is associated with obesity. And so even the term that was used has a negative connotation even to a consumer. Whereas you look at proteins, they're built up essential fatty acids or fat, essential proteins are called amino acids. So, there's no, the connection isn't quite there the same way. I was saying if an amino was considered something that caused, diabetes or something, proteins mightn't be considered as much of a friend as they are today. So there's a certain amount of connotation to a word as much as to, anything else, because it's been demonized over decades.
Mm. Yeah. So how important, Dennis, is it, in terms of fat being our friend, the source of the fats and oils, the quality ingredients that we're getting? How important is that? We were talking about Kerrygold butter earlier. The primary reason why I like Kerrygold is because it comes from grass-finished cows,
Yeah.
dairy. So how important is it that we're finding, healthy fats and oils from good quality sources?
Yeah, absolutely critical. It's something we spend all our time doing in terms of sustainable sources and all that. And we guarantee that, but it's about the balance as well of fats and oils. What are you consuming? Healthy fats are, every fat is healthy in a way, except for obviously, fats like hydrogenation. That is not good, carcinogenic effects and all that. But natural fats from their own sources that are extracted naturally, or created through animals like cows for milk and creating butter. It's about then getting the balance, because all saturated fats are not good for you, and all polyunsaturated fats are, not enough for you. You got essential fatty acids, but then it's about getting that balance right. And, we're always trying to make sure that we offer the balance. And then the source is extremely important in making sure that there's minimal processing, that they're coming from a sustainable source, and that it's something that's going to be around in 100 years or 1,000 years, if we do use fats and oils as a main source of energy and metabolism and a health source.
Super interesting. And Victoria, from your perspective and your career, what have you seen with the keto diet throughout the years and going in and out of mainstream, and some of maybe the misinformation that's out there? What are some of the things that you're seeing with the history of ketogenic diet?
Yeah, it's interesting. And as Dennis sort of touched on, right around like the 1950s, 1960s, or sort of when things started to shift with the science, 1950s, right around the time that President Eisenhower suffered a massive heart attack, the nation was kind of like, oh my gosh, we have to figure out what the cause of this is. And at that same time, there was a scientist by the name of Ancel Keys, who maybe you're familiar with, who unfortunately cherry-picked some of his data and had this like very determined idea and hypothesis that unfortunately basically dictated years and years to come of sort of dietary advice. And it unfortunately wasn't really rooted in sound science. And not to mention the fact that once that sort of happened and that data was published, and it was sort of like this perfect storm with the president suffering a heart attack, and somehow in a very short amount of time, it became this, saturated fat is bad, or just fat in general, dietary cholesterol is bad. And it just was this kind of cascade of sort of this snowball effect, if you will, from there, and kind of became part of policy. And the sugar industry got involved. And when the sugar industry got involved, then with the science side of things, it was sort of downplaying the role of sugar in heart disease, and really continued to promote the idea of fat as sort of the culprit instead. And so unfortunately, I think we lost out on so much good time to research the ketogenic diet, or just low carb nutrition in general, because we were so hyper focused on low fat and fat being the problem, instead of sort of like overall macronutrient distribution and other things. We kind of zoomed in, and it became this like domino effect where the food industry completely changed what was on store shelves. So, fat makes food taste good. So in order to make it taste good again, once you take the fat out, you have to replace it with something, which that got replaced with sugar. So you saw all these like low fat this, low fat that, bad fat, good fat, whatever. It became very confusing and became a part of this country's dietary approach, unfortunately. But it wasn't, there's been, continuing research that's happened over the course of time. But unfortunately, I do think we've missed out on a lot of science that could have happened during that time period that didn't, because we were so hyper focused on fat being, and so convinced, to be honest, that fat was the demon here. And, now you see, which is a very unfortunate situation, that the country is just in the worst shape of its life. Obesity is on the rise, cancer is on the rise. All of these sort of metabolically linked ailments are up higher than they've ever been before. And so now like the buzz of keto is sort of back. I think partly that kind of came back into the equation. I think the supplement industry did, the exogenous ketone industry kind of started to really bring this conversation about again. Obviously Atkins was a key player along the way, but got sort of sidelined. And I think the supplement world kind of started to bring that conversation back, and more people started to implement the diet themselves, which has been really interesting to kind of watch. I mean, I started it myself like 6-7 years ago. And at that time, there was no information out there except for with epilepsy. And, based upon what I knew about nutrition science at the time, I was like, my heart might explode, but it makes me feel good. And I'm going to just keep going and see where we get. And now it's exciting to see that there's more and more emerging evidence showing that may not be what we thought it was and isn't what we thought it was. And as long as we're looking at quality nutrition and a well-formulated ketogenic diet, not over, and anybody can over-consume anything. But as long as we're doing this in a quality way, I think it has a lot of great potential benefits. So it's exciting. It's interesting to see where that history went. We have a lot of catching up to do, but that's sort of what we do at Metabolic Health Summit is try to bring all those researchers together so we can kind of maybe move it forward a little bit faster. And then you have progressive brands like, companies like CoreFX who are also doing their due diligence and coming out with, providing other brands with these ingredients that are really helping support this movement as well. That's how Denis and I actually know each other. He's been an amazing supporter of our conference. And I think those two sides go hand in hand, but at the same time, it's the people doing the diet themselves that have really pushed this movement forward. And in turn, having those conversations with their doctors who have then started to gain a ton of interest in, wait, what are you doing? Okay, I need to look into this myself. And so it's been a cool thing to kind of witness, especially over the last decade. I would say it's really started to like take off.
Yeah. I think what you just mentioned, Victoria, much of what you talked about there kind of answered my next question. And that's, where do we go from here? We've made some good progress but also to your point, the state of our nation in terms of our health has arguably never been worse, especially things like obesity. So my question is, where do we go from here? And for you, Denis, what are some things that CoreFX is doing to support the ketogenic diet and kind of further that mission? And Victoria, I know you touched on some of those things that you're working on, but I'd love to hear from each of you on where do we go from here? What are some things that you're seeing in the work that you do that's hopeful for this movement? And what do you see for us in the next 5-10 years when it comes to metabolic health, to nutrition, and to the overall ketogenic diet?
I would say, from the brands we work with commercially, the needle has been moved. And I think a lot of it has to do with a change in consumers' way of looking at what they consume and how they view food, beverages, health, nutrition, personalized nutrition, food as medicine. All those movements are actually dictating what we do for consumers now, rather than the other way around. So if the 50s was now, that wouldn't have happened. It just wouldn't have, because consumers wouldn't have, just bought into one person dictating what you should do and creating a pyramid based off that. So, consumers are very savvy. So then it's about us taking the responsibility to educate and give all the options, but give it true, warts and all, but put it out there. And I think that's what we're trying to do every day. Get the good word out about what everything is, and then a consumer decides, and they let us know what direction they're going to go. But we certainly have to have the education. We have to have the right science behind everything we do. That's why it's so great to have the support of Victoria and all her friends and colleagues in the science world to lead the way, give the information. Then we as commercial businesses can do our own work on clinical studies, make sure that we're validating what we do. At CoreFX, we're putting an awful lot of effort now into getting ourselves ready to do clinical studies, create white papers, work with Victoria and her peers as well to get that supported and make sure that we're on the right path, because saying something is one thing, but doing it and backing it up is another. So we want to make sure that we have all that information. And what we're doing here as a business, there's a lot of convenience related to it. Converting fats and oils into dry stable powders so the consumer can get to it and use it more easily. But that's a part of our story. We're a turnkey ingredient provider for health and nutrition. So proteins are also very important, as are micronutrients, and we're making sure that we're able to combine all of those to give balance. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, right? I mean, everything in moderation, combining everything together. You talked at the start about sleep and stress. I mean, it all comes together if you do it the right way. And we're here to set consumers up for success. That's what we want to do.
Yeah, it's so true. That's what I love about health in general and having conversations around health, is that everything is interconnected. You can't have one piece without the other. It's one collective effort. And to your point, Dennis, I think that is one big thing for a lot of for consumers, is that the convenience piece. You mentioned finding ways to put fats and oils into things like powder. I know a lot of people are interested in a lot of what we're talking about right now, but they want to know, how can this apply to me, and how can I easily implement this into my lifestyle? So that's super helpful. Victoria, was there anything else that you wanted to add in terms of where we go from here in terms of ketogenic diet?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dennis touched on some really great points, and listening to the consumer. And these days, the consumer is becoming very empowered, which is an exciting thing to see. I mean, it's even sort of expanded the definition of metabolic health, which once was sort of looked at as just the absence of metabolic disease. It's now becoming so much more than just a set of 5-6 markers to look out for. It's like, how do I prevent, not only prevent metabolic disease, but how do I optimize my metabolic health? And so people are really starting to have, and honestly, that's how our conference was kind of born. It started as a scientific meeting where we wanted to bring all these amazing researchers together who were almost like working in silos. So we could kind of bring them in, they could collaborate, we could move this further. But there were a lot of people outside of academia and the medical communities that were like, I want to learn this too. I want to understand this deep science. And they were starting to come to the event. Patients were starting to attend. And so we said, okay, let's open it up to the general public. So I love the fact that CoreFX listens to the consumer. I also think what Dennis touched on as well is evidence has to lead the way. And that's something that is at our very core of Metabolic Health Initiative and Metabolic Health Summit is, where is the evidence taking us? That's why we called it the conference, the Metabolic Health Summit. It used to be called the Conference on Nutritional Ketosis and Metabolic Therapeutics, which is very specific and not very good for marketing. So we flipped it and called it Metabolic Health Summit, because we're going to go where the research takes us, whether that's with the ketogenic diet, whether that's with certain fats or not, or whatever. The research right now is very promising around the ketogenic diet. It has been in specific areas for many, many years. But it's our job to educate the public and the medical community of what does the science look like. Everything we do has to be evidence-based. We're very careful about what we put out there into the world. We do a lot of digital online education. But something that we knew from the very get-go was education is key. And how do we help sort of become this platform where physicians can come to or scientists can come to, and they know they're getting quality information. And that was sort of the pivotal moment where we started to offer continuing medical education. So basically a doctor has an incentive, or a dietitian has an incentive to go to the conference because they get credit for it. And that can serve as education, ongoing education for them, which is something that is a part of their profession. And so at the end of the day, we have to let the science lead the way. There has to be more research around this. We have to be very collaborative. And that's our goal with bringing everybody together so they can talk about this and maybe new ideas can form. But at the end of the day, we have to let the science lead us, because I think we went astray back in unfortunately, the 1950s, 1960s, and we kind of saw what sort of unfolded after that. And I think we really need to be very clear about what the science is telling us, and be very clear on how we educate the public, both from the science community side, like the Metabolic Health Summit side, and the ingredient supplier side and the brands side. I think we have to be very responsible in how we communicate that to the public, because everything's intertwined. Much like you said with health, it's all intertwined between the patient going to the doctor and the doctor, implementing this with patients. And there's a lot of potential in the next 5 to 10 years. I think the most exciting thing is the potential for nutrition to be a part of the conversation when somebody goes and meets with their doctor, be it maybe a part of the conversation when somebody's diagnosed with cancer, or at least possibly a first line of defense, potentially with something like epilepsy, or at least an option in combination with drugs, or maybe the first option, then try this if the diet fails. But I think if people are given the option, and I think if we can bring food into the conversation, that could really change the course of science and medicine and the health of our country.
I appreciate so much of what you both said. I think from a consumer standpoint, we have to let the science lead us, as you mentioned, Victoria, and allow them to take the facts and the information and make healthy decisions and choices that's right for them individually. So I appreciate you taking that standpoint. Before I get to my last question, where can people find more about the work that you guys are doing? Denis, CoreFX, if people want to learn more about CoreFX, and then Victoria, if people care to research a little bit more about your work and the summit, where can people find you?
Well, I'll go first. I'm sure Victoria has a laundry list of places. We have our website, of course, CoreFXingredients.com. We're very active on LinkedIn as well. And I would say going forward, to carry on from what I was saying earlier about peer reviewed papers or white papers, we will be more active in the world of science, so that we can showcase at that level as well. But other than that, trade shows, thankfully, they're coming back soon, so we'll be at a trade show near you sometime soon, and we're really looking forward to getting back to that. We missed out on Victoria's Metabolic Health Summit this year because of COVID, but it's coming back in 2022. We're already looking forward to it. We're already planning for it. And then, I suppose we also promote ourselves through the brands that we work with, and as an ingredient provider, we're not the ones that is out in front of a consumer. We're the engine behind those brands, making them successful, and validating them and supporting them and making sure they get what they get. So we're always excited to see the brands we work with on a shelf or on a virtual shelf. But we're looking forward to doing more as COVID unwinds and we can get out into the world. That's for sure.
Yes, excellent, fantastic. And Victoria, where can people find you?
Yeah, metabolichealthsummit.com is a great place to start. You can learn more about the conference. We also offer, as I mentioned earlier, we're really this year, because we weren't able to have the conference, which was actually supposed to be last weekend, unfortunately due to the pandemic, we've really been focusing on digital education content. And much of which is actually free. So if people go to our website, you can actually find free access to a variety of interviews with top metabolic health experts, physicians, researchers sort of in the trenches, that are completely free. In addition, each year we actually put out sort of a year in review of ketogenic metabolic therapy. So if somebody's interested in just kind of taking a glance and doesn't feel like searching on Google for 12 years, you can actually go to our website and download a free copy of an ebook that we put together every year that basically has taken a good portion of the research that's happened over the course of the year, specifically 2020. It wasn't a total train wreck. There actually was good progress that was made. And you can take a look at all the key highlights for studies. There's hyperlinks to each of them. And so our mission is to really make education accessible, both free, as well as you can download and purchase all of our presentation videos from the last 2 years as well. And in the future, we're going to be offering also continuing medical education online because, just beyond just the once a year conference, the pandemic has really made it very evident that we need to do even more in the virtual world. So there's some exciting things to come in that regard, but you can find us on every social media platform just about at Metabolic Health Summit. And if people have questions and want to reach out to me personally, you can email at info@metabolichealthsummit.com. But yeah, our next conference has been, it's going to kick off in Santa Barbara at the Hilton Beachfront Resort there, May 5th through May 8th, 2022. So tickets are early bird is already on sale for that. So we hope to see people there.
Perfect. That's great. I have my calendar marked.
Sorry, yes. Dan, just another shout out as well. We're just launching our ingredients on food ingredients online, which is kind of like the Amazon for ingredient companies. So if your listeners out there want to buy, smaller volumes, try stuff out, it's a great platform to be able to try something, or, start up a new brand. If you want to just start small and try something out, you can go to food ingredients online. And any listener who wants to do something or start something new, we're always here to support. It doesn't matter how small you are. For us, we'll always help get you going because it's important, because you're doing something that's gonna, improve the nutrition and lifestyle and health of somebody out there.
Excellent. And I'll have all of that linked up in the description and show notes so everyone can access those links easily. My last question that I have for you is around your definition of health. And much of what we've talked about is, the science and, the history of the ketogenic diet. And while that's very important, I think we can all agree that the overarching theme and our overarching goal is health for ourselves and for our loved ones and for greater society. So with that, what does health mean to you?
I'll go first. I guess it's a loaded question. It means so many things. No, but I think that a word that kind of comes to mind is freedom. I think health is very freeing. It really allows you to get the most enjoyment out of life. Mm-hmm. There's nothing really holding you back when you have your health. And, it can be a pretty powerful thing that, you don't have maybe physical limitations or, emotional limitations potentially. I mean, there's so many factors that come into play, but freedom is probably the biggest thing that comes to mind. And not to digress, but I dealt with COVID this year, and I'm even though I went in metabolically healthy as can be, I'm dealing with some long-term COVID effects, and it's become even more apparent to me, and I've become even more grateful to have sort of that foundation of health, because when it's sort of, you take a few steps back, you're like, wow, health is everything. Health is the ability to spend time with the people you love, the ability to just go on a walk down the street or whatever. So it becomes that much more apparent when it's maybe kind of pulled back a little bit and you're like, okay, I'm now more grateful than ever for the freedom that it provides me in my life.
I love that answer. I've always, said that you can have, all the money in the world. You can be, a leader of a company, you can have a large house, but if you don't have your health, you're not able to enjoy any of those things.
Right.
And also to your point, family, you wouldn't even be able to enjoy time with family if you're not healthy. So I appreciate that. And Dennis, what does health mean to you?
Well, Victoria stole my freedom line. That's for sure. I would have definitely got a lot of that.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah. But to add to that, I would say it's delivering on purpose and promise, whether it's personal or professional. Because if you're just not around, and if you can't just physically do anything, then you just can't deliver on any of your goals or your own purpose, your own promise to your loved ones, to your professional colleagues, to the earth. You name it. If you don't have health, you can't do any of it. And I think people only realize how important health is when they don't have it or something happens, like what happened in Victoria with COVID. It's like it's taken for granted so much, right? And yes. When a loved one or yourself or somebody has a health episode, then it's like, whoa, this is the most important thing ever. And it really focuses everybody on it.
I would agree 1,000,000%. So and I would say people who are in the depths of maybe ill health right now, who feel like it's so challenging to get out, I think it's so important to, one thing we didn't mention is work with your doctor in trying to implement this lifestyle, because I think the more you speak openly to your physician, the more you speak to those around you, it just continues to create that conversation. And it's so important, especially those who might not be very well, like say with type 2 diabetes or something like, metabolic syndrome or whatever the case may be. I think it's important to also work alongside somebody when maybe you're not in good health, to get out of that. But once you can get out of that and make those strides, oh my gosh, it's life changing.
Yeah, it's so true. I like that piece about having somebody to work with and kind of work along the way. It's really life changing. And back to your point, Dennis, of, we really appreciate our health when we all of a sudden don't have that anymore. I know this is really minor, but I know we've all been there. If you have a cut on your finger and then all of a sudden you can't use your dominant hand, you're like, whoa, I really took for granted that I had, my hand was healthy or my foot was healthy. And I know that can be minor, but if you relate that to something bigger, that's when you really start appreciating and putting things into perspective of how important our health is. So
yeah, and
I appreciate both of your answers.
We help, I personally, and I know Victoria's the same, we help where we can, a business is a business, but what we do and what we believe in this whole world of, ketosis or fats and oils generally, it does make a difference. I've got two really good friends in Ireland who both have MS, and, it's a horrifying disease, and they're doing really well. They're really strong, but, it's there. It doesn't go away. And, I've educated them on ketogenic diet and how it might help. They both jumped on it, and they just feel better. Sometimes it's, just doing something different can just mentally lift you out of the fog anyway. But they do believe that there's a benefit that they're seeing in terms of how they're feeling. And that's, part of the cognitive issue. And I mean, Victoria can explain that better, but, it's about helping no matter what, and if somebody isn't quite well, then anything you can do to help, you'll do it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Quality of life. That's exactly what, I think with what we saw with some of the pilot studies we were involved with the nonprofit that I mentioned, is just providing a patient or a person with the ability to be a part of their treatment protocol, to be an active member, and to actually have something that potentially might help them. Just simply the mindset of going from feeling out of control and like you can't really do anything to like, well, maybe this might help. That shift, I think, is huge in the healing process in and of itself. But then too, some of the promising areas of research that are showing that, hey, there may actually be some pretty significant mechanisms at play here as well. MS is certainly a very complex issue, but it's exciting to see where the research is headed, which is actually inclusive of things along those lines. So,
yeah, definitely. Excellent. All right. Well, Dennis and Victoria, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I've really enjoyed today's conversation, and I hope my audience will get as much out of it as I have today. So thank you both.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks,
You
Dan.
too.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for
Thanks.
having us on.